understand what's the future value of my land going to be worth. And it's going to be based upon what, more than anything, on what the economy and what the local real estate market is, more than the actual pipeline easement itself.
Who paid for your question? My question was, would you buy a property that had a pipeline?
I wouldn't have a problem with it.
I would. I've been working with,
I
I'm working
would.
for Williams Gas Pipeline for 21 years. And
We've had 2 explosions in this area.
and that was a propane line on Texas Eastern, I understand that.
2 miles from my house, there's cracked a window in my house. And now you want to put one on my land?
Well, we've been safely operating, Williams Gas Pipeline has been safely operating pipelines for over 60 years, interstate gas pipeline. With very, very minor issues. We've had a couple of incidences over the past few years, but I wouldn't have an issue. We have many pipelines that go through residences that have no safety issues at all.
Speaking of that pipeline, you're gonna have to pass over or under.
The
Are you not?
Texas Eastern, the propane line is what you're.
Yeah, you're speaking of the propane line. You're gonna have to pass over or under that line, are you not?
I believe we would.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact routing, but I believe we would have to.
Do you have any details as to whether or not, when you pass over, you are in line with the target in Schoharie, or do you have to make a bend? Are there any bends in the line?
No, what do you mean by bend? I mean, the pipeline is not straight. I mean, we're gonna have routing deviations, but we would cross the propane line at, are you talking about at a right angle?
That's what I'm asking you.
But we
You
would
you
cross
wouldn't
it,
just
we'd cross it in a very safe manner
then go
with
across
the
it.
appropriate distance from Texas Eastern's pipeline. We would be in full communication with Texas Eastern when we're crossing the pipeline.
All
They
right.
will have Texas Eastern
Okay,
operations crew
okay.
on the
You'll pass
site.
the pipeline at 90 degrees to the existing line,
That would be the intent.
okay? And then after that, you will get back on target. Listen, I know because you're specifically in the pipeline. The explosion you talked about occurred in my backyard.
That's right.
But, so you're gonna cut across the pipeline. Then you're gonna get back on target to Schoharie?
I mean, as part of our right-of-way, our permanent 50-foot right-of-way, there would be a crossing.
I know that. I know that. You're gonna cross it at 90 degrees.
Yes,
Correct.
we would orient our pipeline in that area, our alignment, our pipeline alignment to cross it at 90 degrees, at a right angle.
And then you're gonna have to get back on target to go to Schoharie.
Correct, there'd be a bend in the pipeline.
Anybody have any details on what kind of dimensions we're talking about there?
Dimensions, I mean, in terms of the separation between our pipeline and Texas Eastern pipeline?
No, no. The degrees of travel.
I think what he's asking is, what's the minimum or maximum deviation in the bend that you would
Let me
put?
put it this way. This is occurring in my backyard, my front yard, okay? So I'd like to know some details on crossing the pipeline.
Jim Kretzern with engineering out of Williams. Well, we crossed 90 degrees, but we were 45 down and minimum spacing between pipes 2 feet. You're asking basically what's that spread to come back up online. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, we would basically be a certain, we have specifications, but we'd be a certain distance. 45 down, and then 2 feet minimum from the pipe, and then we 45 back up, get back in line.
Then you get back onto the target.
Yes.
Okay.
It would never deviate from the target. We would have a route, from point X to point Y.
Well,
Come in.
let me give you the reason for my interest.
Right.
I know you're coming up Parker Schoolhouse
Yeah.
Road. I know you're gonna cross Quaker Road, and I know then you're gonna encounter the pipeline. This is my property, and this is the pipeline. And I wanna know, and this is my front yard. I'm interested in knowing how much of my front yard you plan on traversing. It's that simple.
That's a very detailed question about one tract of land, and we've got many to cross.
Well, it's my land, and I like to.
And I appreciate, you're right, it is your land, and it's very important to you,
And it's my front
Appreciate it.
yard. Okay?
excuse me?
But to that effect, where we are in the process right now, we haven't started to get boots on the ground, so to speak. So we haven't started our field surveys and our final field routing of the pipe. So we can't necessarily tell you it's going to be, 100 feet from your house, in your front yard, in your backyard, until we get the folks out in the field to figure out where the sensitive resources are, such as, wetlands, water bodies, and then we have an actual
And then,
field engineer that comes out and routes where that center line of the pipe will go.
And the reason why we're here now is, this is,
yeah,
we're
but
trying to
at
get.
that time, what recourse do I have? When you say, okay, this is going right through my front yard. Do I have a recourse?
Well, I think it's an upfront discussion with the land agent that's contacting you to identify what your concerns are relative to potential routing through your property. And those will absolutely be taken into consideration when the field engineers come on.
Yeah. We'll have 35 to 40 land agents for the whole pipeline, so you will be meeting with a land agent, probably on multiple occasions to discuss the routing on your property. At that
So
point,
you
and
don't
at that point, your concerns, they're being taken into consideration now, and they will be in the near future.
Okay, well, one more question. You do consider the environment when you're making this initial plan?
Yes.
Do you do it by air?
We flew it on
I
March
mean, you know if
30th.
you're gonna cross a lake or
Right,
a stream or...
We'll actually have field biologists out in the field. That's why we've sent the letters out requesting access for these environmental and cultural resource surveys. Because we can look at an aerial photograph and identify where potential issues are, but until you actually get, like I said, boots on the ground to get out there and physically identify.
I mean, you do consider, say, here's a house, let me stay the hell away from it.
Yes, we do. We do consider residences, absolutely.
We had a question in the back, yeah.
I just want, as John said, we want to come to you now, very early on in the process. So we're not down to detailed routing design of the pipeline yet.
Yeah, I
We
know.
want to get you involved now.
Okay.
We don't have all the information to answer all your questions because it's very preliminary right now. As we work through over the next couple of months, we'll get much more detailed information for you. You'll be working with we'll have land agents calling you.
Any
And
engineers
meeting with you in
amongst you
person.
now?
Excuse me?
Any engineers amongst you now?
Jim Kretzinger, he's our lead pipeline engineer.
Okay.
Right, and at the open houses in July, we'll have much better information because we will have started that field survey process, and we'll have better drawings to show people and kind of hone in on particular parcels so that we can really talk specifically on a one-to-one basis with folks.
Okay.
You said that this is a 30-inch high-pressure pipeline. So I can't help but immediately think about what happened in San Bruno, California about a year and a half ago, also with a 30-inch pipeline where 8 people died and 30-odd houses were destroyed and a whole lot more damage. And there would have been a lot more people killed if there hadn't been a PTA meeting that night. So even this pipeline coming through ag land, suppose there's a leak in a joint, and then a tractor goes over and makes a spark by hitting a stone right over that leak. What assurances can you give of safety?
Well, I mean, I can start with the design of the pipeline, the construction of the pipeline, and the operation and maintenance of the pipeline to keep events like that from occurring. I can go through the whole list of things from the way we design the pipeline, where we route it, all the way from, our pipe is obviously made in a pipe mill. We have inspection all the way from the pipe mill, wherever the pipe mill is. It could be in Florida, it could be in California. We have construction inspectors inspecting the construction of the pipeline throughout the whole pipeline process. When you talk about joints in the pipeline, those are welds. All of our welds are x-rayed at 100%. Every single high-pressure weld on this pipeline, every 30-inch weld will be x-rayed and then reviewed by experts to make sure that there are suitable quality x-rays, quality welds. After that, we will then hydrostatically test the pipe with water for 8 hours at a higher pressure than 1480 to make sure that it can withstand that pressure. And then we will run a caliper pig through the pipeline to make sure there are no dents, and to make sure the pipeline is, there's no ovalities, that it is circular. There's no damage to the pipeline. After the pipeline has been laid in the ditch and then backfilled. And then during the operation, we're planning on, for the Constitution pipeline, there'll be about 10 people on the 120-mile length that will be operating the pipeline, from managers to different types of technicians. And we have what we call our pipeline integrity program. This is where we look at any deterioration in the pipeline. We have cathodic protection systems, where we inject a current onto our pipeline. This is standard across the industry, and that stops any type of corrosion of the pipeline. With that cathodic protection system, we monitor it, and we can tell if there are any anomalies in that cathodic protection system. I think it's every 7 years, we run a smart pig through the pipeline. And that's, if you're familiar with smart pig, it puts out a magnetic flux, and it can detect any loss of steel in the pipe. Just for your information, the wall thickness on the pipe will be about approximately a half an inch thick. So that smart pig will tell us if we have any wall loss. And at that time, we will start, if there is any, we will start taking measures to dig out any sections of pipe that could be bad. Also, during the operations of the pipeline, we fly it on a regular basis. We'll fly it on a regular basis, and we'll look for any type of issues we have, any type of encroachment issues we have, or any damage to our above-ground block valve settings, above-ground pipeline facilities. So we will have a operations and maintenance staff at the beginning of the operation of the pipeline, approximately 10 people, and they will be here for the duration of the pipeline.
You just said that you would run the smart pig once every 7 years.
I believe it's our integrity management plan. I do not quote me on that exactly.
But that's what PERC requires.
Correct.
But it sounds like an awfully long time in between.
Well, what we'll have, in between, I described what we do in the construction project in terms of inspection, x-raying wells, testing the pipeline, running a caliper pig.
Once it's in operation.
Well, then once it's in operation, we do aerial patrols. We'll have the operations staff on the right-of-way every day, and they'll be overseeing the pipeline. We have our cathodic protection system that actually protects the pipeline. That is an industry standard accepted means of stopping corrosion of the pipeline. And if there are any anomalies in our cathodic protection system, we will detect that, and we will take measures on the pipeline.
But you said that stops, or that can detect.
Stops and it stops, and we can detect issues.
So
Stops corrosion, and we can detect issues.
does that include the scaling that comes from the much higher concentration of radioactive materials that comes from the Marcellus gas?
I'm not sure what radioactive materials you're talking about.
Talking about radon, uranium, barium, especially the radon.
That's all natural.
Radon is an inert gas. It doesn't react chemically with anything.
That's right. But apparently there's scaling that goes on constantly because of that. And there are all sorts of.
The acid in our soil.
We've got all that in our water here.
Well, we deal with acidic soil. On our cathodic protection system, we deal with acidic soil.
Once an easement purchased, okay, the pipeline is in, how close can the structure be built to the existing pipeline?
It's in the right-of-way edge.
Right up to the right-of-way edge.
So it would be 25 feet.
Well, basically, if we have a 50-foot permanent right-of-way, basically our pipeline will be at 15 feet and then 35, won't be exactly in the center, but you can build up to the edge of the easement. So either 15 feet to 35 feet.
In the back.
Your map shows a single pipeline coming from Pennsylvania up to Schoharie County.
Correct.
Are there going to be additional pipelines connected to that along the way?
in terms of,
To feed gas into the pipeline.
the two receipt points for gas coming into Constitution is in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania.
So there would be no other connections to the pipeline along that route?
As of right now, Constitution, my job is to build this pipeline, a 30-inch diameter pipeline, 120 miles, and it's filled to capacity. We are filled to capacity with what our two customers, where our two customers are delivering gas into our pipeline in Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. So there are no plans for any other receipt points. There's only two.
Regarding, just going back to the payment issue, is there payment for access to the properties for the surveying?
We do not pay for surveying.
So what then is the incentive to give you access to the property?
I guess I don't know. I mean, we provide information that, for instance, the environmental resources information that's gathered would be available publicly to you to know perhaps a little bit more about your property. But surveying, paying for surveying is not something we typically do.
Typically, or not at all ever?
I'm not aware of doing it at all.
And neither am I. That's why we're doing a 600-foot corridor, to see if we can get the best route we can.
What's in it?
Can you tell me if permanent easements are a federal requirement, or is that something that is a company policy? I tend to think that the pipeline won't be operating forever. But the easement potentially described as stay permanent. So again, is that a federal requirement that the company obtain a permanent easement from landowners, or is that something that can be modified for shorter terms and terms?
The easement is permanent as long as the pipeline is there and operating. There's oftentimes language that if it ceases to operate or is removed, which is very highly unlikely, it would revert back to the landowner. But the permanency is tied to the operation of the pipeline.
The projected lifespan of a pipeline?
But I can talk to you about our transco pipeline with Williamstown, it starts in South Texas and feeds New York City and a lot of markets on the eastern seaboard. It was put in service in 1950, it's now 2012, and there are no plans whatsoever of stopping that, ceasing that pipeline from operation. Absolutely no plan. We're actually breaking flow records every week this past winter.
Is there any-
I'm sorry, been winter before.
Is there any reason why you wouldn't have taken something like the I-88 corridor itself and work within that right of way?
Yeah, parallel it almost all the way.
Well,
How does that get-
I would use the term loosely. We're not in the I-88.
But why wouldn't, there's land, not private property owners, there's already established, stuff owned by the state, and why wouldn't that ever be considered?
There are significant restrictions under the federal highway law for what you can and cannot do within a highway right-of-way. It may be possible to build a whole new right-of-way that's immediately parallel and adjacent to a highway right-of-way, but when you look at that, you tend to be into heavily populated areas at times, and you end up having a lot more deviations. So although Matt is correct, we loosely follow the I-88 corridor, we're not right next to the highway.
And definitely on the I-88 corridor, that's the largest population density, albeit it's not huge, but it is the largest.
But if you're already on state land that's not, doesn't have residences, it just seems like it would
Well,
have.
for us, state land, we do have, there are issues with locating on state land.
Yeah.
Locating a pipeline on state land.
We're going to take one more question, and you will be available after the meeting to answer some questions?
I think we have 7 or 8 of Williams employees that can
Okay.
take
Let's take
questions.
your question.
We received requests in the mail for a survey company to come on the property and survey. I know for a fact, many people told them we don't want you on the property, okay? Now, how does that get resolved
Well,
without a trespassing situation?
we won't trespass, we will not trespass into your land. So if you say, the landowner says no, we will then have a land agent work with that landowner to try to discuss with them. Now, we're not gonna stiff arm in that way, we discuss with them about why we need to be on your land to do the surveys because of the need for the pipeline.
Okay, and the result of that is they still don't want you on the property. And how does that get resolved? Does that get resolved by court order?
It would,
After the main,
if,
anything like
if,
that?
if FERC issues a certificate and approves the project, then it would then go to court. We would start negotiating in that aspect, that we do have a FERC certificate of public convenience and necessity, if we receive it.
Along the same lines now, if, whether the landowner says, gives permission or not, what kind of insurance coverage do these people have?
Insurance for,
Any kind of an tree falls on them or anything?
We have a insurance certificate that's readily available to any landowner that has, I think it's a $2 million coverage for not only Williams employees, but for our contractors as well. Happy to hand out to anybody that asks for it. We also are happy to put in a hold harmless and indemnity clause into each and every survey agreement.
You've all heard of NIMBY, not in my backyard.
yes, yes.
Mine's over my dead body, OMG.
Okay.
That's a
Now,
new one.
We said there are 6 employees here, they're gonna be here, we wanna move on to talk, we have a couple of other speakers, and, feel free to stay as long as you want to talk to the representatives from Williams, but we could be here until the next meeting, which starts at 7. So, let me introduce our next speaker. Matthew Brower comes to us from New York State Ag and Markets. He is an ag resource specialist. He's been with them for 20 years. He grew up on a dairy farm. He understands some of the agricultural concerns that you have. He's also an agronomist. He spent some time at Montgomery County Soil and Water Conservation District. So Matt's presentation is very much pictures. It'll show you what is coming, could come, I should say, what could come in the way of the pipeline.
So over the 20 years I've been with the department, I've worked on a number of major pipeline and smaller pipeline projects across the state. And one of the things the department did is, as we observed pipeline construction in farmland, noticed some of the problems, we came up with a set of guidelines or more or less standards for the protection of agricultural resources that we then communicate to the companies and to, in this case, it would be the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and other pipeline projects that are approved by the Public Service Commission here in New York State, and try to get those measures included in whatever order or certificate that they're issuing for the construction of the project. And so what I'm going to show you here is some of the things we observed early on where these measures weren't in place or where they maybe weren't followed exactly by the contractor. And I'm also going to show you why the measures are in place, what happens during construction with farmland, and then what happens when they are followed and the results and why we think this is important. So a project of this size is going to have a lot of traffic across farmland. It's going to involve a lot of heavy equipment. And of course, one of the main things when everything's all said and done is to put it back so that the farmer can farm it and restore it to normal condition. When I'm out there looking at these things during construction and restoration, I tend to view it as, oh, if it were my land, how would I want it? And then I communicate any concerns back to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in this case. If I see something that I don't think is appropriate, I would carry that message to the company and to FERC. And FERC has been very receptive of our input, our comments. We participated as what's called a cooperating agency with them through their process. We're not a regulatory agency. In this case, they would be sort of the main regulatory agency involved. But what we do is we participate with them as a cooperating agency. We provide them with comments throughout the process of our concerns with agriculture and how we think they need to be addressed. And then during construction, we act as an extra set of eyes for them out here. They'll have inspectors, not only from their office in Washington, but also other inspectors on site. But we act as an extra set of eyes because some of these people may not be as familiar with agriculture as we are, and so we can point out problems that they may not pick up on. So the protection measures vary a little bit with the size of the pipeline. One of the things that's important is the width of the temporary right-of-way. Certainly with a 30-inch pipeline, you'll need more right-of-way space than you would for a 16-inch pipeline. The construction equipment would vary. It's going to be much larger for this size. And then the amount of farmland restoration that's needed would vary, and it would require a lot more restoration with this size pipe. Here's a small pipeline, 8-inch being put in. And you see minimal amount of activity, very narrow right-of-way, and so the impacts are much smaller. This is a
30-inch pipeline, am I right?
Correct.
Why are we watching something like that?
Well, I'm just trying to kind of put things in perspective. And this presentation, from here on out, is going to be about bigger pipelines. But the idea is this presentation is meant for pipeline construction in New York. It's not necessarily specific to this project.
Still minimizing the value when using a small pipe.
Well, it's just to give you a sense of the difference between the two. So in this case here, it was a larger pipeline, and the topsoil wasn't stripped properly. And you can see what happens when that soil gets wet. The topsoil, you get a lot of rutting, and then you get mixing of the topsoil and subsoil. I know a lot of times when a farmer has a pipeline come across their property for the first time, and the first thing they start doing is going out there and stripping the topsoil off of the field, the farmers get sometimes a little bit excited and think that that's the wrong approach. But I can tell you over the years of watching pipeline construction or other construction, wind farm projects, electric transmission lines, where the topsoil wasn't protected properly, there can be long-term damage. So we think the removal of the topsoil is important. Is there any way maybe we could turn off some of the lights or all? Yeah. Is there a light switch back there? Okay, so in this case here, this is the pipeline stretch over on this side. The topsoil was stripped off, and you can see the right-of-way got wet. And with the heavy traffic, you get a lot of mixing and churning of the soil material. It's better that happens on the subsoil than on the topsoil. In this case, though, the topsoil wasn't stripped to the full depth. They left a couple inches, and so with that soil moisture condition, the traffic, you get the mixing of the topsoil and subsoil. So it's important for all the topsoil being moved in the right of way. And this is what it would look like as they're stripping the topsoil. They would remove it in an agricultural field for the entire width of the right of way. Once they got the trench open, this is what it would look like. Essentially, you'd have the subsoil on one side of the trench, the work area, and the topsoil. And so this way you keep the subsoil material separate from the topsoil, so you don't end up with a mixed up mess over the right of way. But also, all that work traffic is going to be on the subsoil and not on the topsoil. And here again, there's 2 or 3 inches of topsoil that should have been stripped that wasn't. As the farmers know, in this area, the topsoil depth is relatively shallow, and we have humid weather conditions here, and so it's important to make sure all the topsoil gets removed down to the color change that's obvious with the subsoil. Another thing that you run into a lot of times with this type of construction, in the hills particularly, is a high rock content. Sometimes it's rock that can be ripped with an excavator, sometimes it's rock that has to be blasted. But it's very important that obviously not get mixed with the topsoil. You can see the topsoil berm was over here on the side, and the rock got pulled out of the trench and put on the topsoil. And so there may be a need for some additional right-of-way in those cases, or it's important for the contractor to haul that rock out as soon as it comes out of the trench and doesn't get put over on the topsoil berm. Some people think that the extra width in an agricultural field is a bit much. They get concerned about that. And initially, even when we started suggesting wider widths in agricultural fields, they didn't necessarily go along with us. But you have a lot of traffic out there. There has to be room for the vehicles to pass each other on the right-of-way. Otherwise, they end up encroaching onto the topsoil berm and traveling on it. And so we think that the wider right-of-way to do the job right is important. And again, with the topsoil stripping, it's important because when they start stringing pipe and doing other things, they're gonna cause a lot of running, and we don't want that to happen to the topsoil material. Soil drainage is an important issue. With a lot of the soils that we have, the water moves horizontally, and so when you open a trench of this size, the water tends to flow to it. So it's important to have trench breakers along the pipe to stop the flow of water on the slopes. And it's also important in a lot of these soils to have intercept drains parallel to the pipe and crossing where those trench breakers are to pick up that water so that it doesn't come to the surface. And this is all, we kind of monitor this when the trench is open. We look for seeps in the trench so that we have an idea of where there might be a need for intercept drain lines in the future. But also during restoration, we're looking for these kind of seeps and water boils on the right-of-way so that they can be corrected. Surface water can be a problem too with this type of construction, and we want to make sure. And of course, now they have sediment erosion control requirements during construction so that there is surface water, it's controlled. Again, this is a trench that was backfilled. There was water in the trench when it was backfilled, and it ended up with kind of a soup, a mess there. It's important in agricultural fields to make sure the trench is dewatered before they backfill it so that you don't end up with this kind of slop in the trench. And there's an example of the trench breakers I talked about. We prefer the sandbags as opposed to they have a foam material they use, but that doesn't seal as tight along the pipe and along the edge of the trench, so we prefer sandbag trench breakers, and that's something we would recommend to FERC. When to backfill the trench, of course, that's very important. We get a lot of frost heaving. We don't want a lot of rock in the trench. If it's fairly clean soil that came out of the trench, then the backfilling is not as big of a problem, big of an issue. One thing they're going to want to do is pad the pipe with some pretty clean material, and they have special equipment to do that. It sorts out the rock and it puts the soil back in the trench. But then we don't want this high concentration of rock pushed back into the trench, because especially if it's closer than 2 feet to the surface, it's going to frost heave and the farmers will end up picking stone forever. So that shows the padding material and then clean soil being put back on top. In this case, what they were doing was backfilling the trench with the topsoil. The gentleman that used to work for the department caught on to it. This was a case that was certified by the Public Service Commission and FERC years ago, and actually was able to get a stop work order issued because of this activity. When it's all said and done, we want to see that the topsoil is graded back over the right-of-way at the same depth that it originally was, and we compare it to off right-of-way. We'll go off right-of-way and take the soil augers and see how deep the soil is so that we can make sure it was done properly. We want to make sure that during construction the topsoil is not contaminated with rock or other soil material. And the key is, I didn't put this in upside down. This is the soil profile upside down, and this is not what we want on farmland. We want the topsoil on top, not at the bottom of the trench. And then one of the things you saw in the other slides there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of compaction. So breaking up the soil compaction, really critical with heavy equipment. And then of course removing any stones that are uplifted during that activity, and then topsoil restoration. It's important to break up the compaction before the topsoil is put back, that way you don't get mixing of the topsoil and subsoil, and also you can get the rocks cleaned up so they don't get lifted into the topsoil layer. And then finally, subsoil profile shattering with the right equipment, so again, you don't get mixing of the topsoil and subsoil. I had a farmer recently, we were talking about, it was a wind project, and they had to do the soil decompaction on it. And he said to me, I like all the things they did during restoration, but I don't know if I'd have them do the soil compaction, or decompaction. It makes the soil a little soft there initially, and when you drive over it, you know, you sink in a little bit. And I assured him, I got photos I can show that if you don't break up this compaction, you won't grow anything on that right of way for a while. This is gonna be, with the amount of traffic on that subsoil during construction, this is gonna be like a highway out there. So, very compacted. It's really important, again, there's an example of the traffic. It's really important to get the right equipment with deep shanks, go down 18 inches and really break up the soil profile to get rid of that compaction. There's various types. Regular farm chisel plow will not work. We've had contractors try to bring in that kind of thing. We let them mess around for a little while, and then we check the compaction, show them they're only going down about 3 inches, and they end up getting the right equipment eventually. It's important to break up the compaction in a couple different directions, because some of the shanks on the equipment are spaced fairly wide, so if you just make a couple passes back and forth, you can have gaps in between that don't really get decompacted. And then I mentioned the rock picking, of course, that's critical, because otherwise that would just get covered up with the topsoil. We say anything 4 inches and larger in size should be removed from the right of way. Mechanical equipment works best for that. It's hard in some of these soils with heavy stone content to do it by hand. A lot of times the rock picking can result in more compaction, and if it does, they have to go back and do additional subsoil decompaction until they get the rocks out and get the soil decompacted. The best way to prevent this problem is keep all the traffic to one side of the right-of-way rather than having traffic on the whole right-of-way during the stone picking and recompacting everything. It makes more sense to keep all the traffic to one side, and then you only have to decompact that one narrow strip. Then replacing the topsoil, again, replacing it to the original depth, and then we will check, and the ag inspector will check the topsoil or the subsoil compaction. Once the topsoil's back and everything's done, they're getting ready to seed it. We'll check the compaction one more time to make sure it meets the appropriate conditions. If all this is done right, you won't be able to know where the right-of-way is. You shouldn't see any difference in the crops. This photo was taken a year or two after construction of a 30-inch, it was a 24 or 30-inch pipeline, I don't remember, but comparable size, and the corn responded fine on the right-of-way. This photo was taken the spring after a smaller pipeline was put in. I think it was 16-inch. What happened was the contractor wanted to do the subsoil decompaction in the fall when the soils were too wet for it to be effective. We told them not to do it. They went ahead and did it anyway, and this is what the corn crop looked like in the spring. Consequently, they had to go back and do it again. Timing's everything. When it's wet, they need to stay off the ag field, stay out of off the topsoil. Otherwise, this is what you end up with. It just gets, the soil structure gets damaged and you end up with mud. A lot of times with a project of this size, by the time they get started with construction, get the pipe in the ground, get it backfilled, it's getting late summer, early fall. In the ag fields, it's often too wet to do the subsoil decompaction and have it be effective. So we have sort of a cutoff. When the soil moisture gets too high for doing decompaction, they have to temporarily seed it and come back in the spring when it dries again. So in agricultural land, it's common to have construction and restoration last for more than a year. A lot of farmers don't like this, and in the spring they're in a hurry to get that topsoil back on. But one of the advantages, other than protecting the soil resource, is that during the winter, with a trench this size, you can get a lot of settling. And so if that topsoil hasn't been put back, when they come in the spring, they have the settling, they can blade off the subsoil, and then lay the topsoil back over. If you put the topsoil back in the fall, and then you get the settling during the winter, now you've got a void in the field, and they have to import topsoil is the only way. We won't allow them to grade the topsoil to fill the trench, because then the topsoil is too shallow on either side of the trench. So if you put the topsoil back in the fall, you get settling, it creates a lot more work in the spring and more problems. So it tends to work better to let it set for the winter. Again, working on the right of way when it's too wet, wrong approach. This was a project that was started real early in the spring. Topsoil was saturated, and it didn't go very well, so we prefer that they not work in ag fields when the topsoil is saturated. And then we think that a 2-year monitoring period is needed for agricultural land. A lot of times there's going to be changes in soil drainage pattern. There can be excess rock, as I mentioned, the frost heaving. Then you can have residual soil compaction if it's not properly taken care of during construction. And we also check for topsoil deficiencies during that period. As I mentioned, possibly the need for intercept drainage because of the soil drainage we have. And you can see that on this right away there were seeps coming where they crossed the slopes. The water was seeping into the trench and then coming to the soil surface. Similar situation here with water in the trench. I mentioned rock. We watch it for a couple of years to make sure that there's not a higher rock content on the right of way compared to the rest of the field. And if there's a compaction problem following construction and the crops aren't responding, they have to come back and decompact it again. And if there's not enough topsoil, if the topsoil gets mixed during construction with subsoil, or the topsoil depth somehow comes out wrong, there may be a need to import topsoil. And then one of the keys with pasture areas is to allow them to keep the temporary fence up. Once the right of way is seeded, it's a lot of times the farmers want to get the cattle back in there as soon as it starts to turn green. We tell the company it's important that they work out an arrangement with the farmer that right of way can be fenced off until that seeding is well enough established, so that when the cattle do get back in there, they're not going to punch it out and destroy the seeding. That's important to think about as you're talking with the company about compensation and so on. So in summary, a lot of compaction occurs on the right of way, a lot of disturbance. It's important to have the right equipment, take the right measures to restore the farmland the way it's supposed to be. Stripping the topsoil is necessary to prevent this kind of damage to the topsoil itself. If this happens to the subsoil, it's not a problem. Drainage problems will occur from a project of this size. It's just a matter of where and when. So it's necessary to have a couple of years of monitoring to find them. It's very important to get the grade of the surface back the way it was before, so you don't have ponding issues. There's my contact information, and a couple other things that I noted during the questions there before. The question came up about invasive species. Sure. Let me go back.
Actually, I have contact sheets back here.
I'll leave that there.
There's a whole pile of them.
The question came up about invasive species, but another important issue with moving from farm to farm is some farmers now are farming organically. And so, using equipment on a non-organic farm and then moving to an organic farm. So it's really important that if you're a farmer, you're farming organically, and this project ends up coming across your property, if it gets certified by FERC, it's important that everybody knows that you are farming organically, so that the appropriate protection measures can be taken so you don't lose your certification. That's every bit as important as the invasive species problem with moving from property to property. And the other thing I wanted to mention there was talk about the easements and payments. The other thing that the farmers have to think about is the crop loss. Now, you're obviously gonna have loss during the year of construction, but it's not uncommon for loss to carry into the second year after construction. It could be 100% crop loss in that second year, it could be 50, 75%, depending on when restoration might get done and whether you can get a partial crop or not.